others, um, that does necessitate government involvement. But in general, no, I don't want any administration anywhere near a university. I think it's a bad thing. In general, here, as I said, again, specific cases of law being something different, matters of law being something different, with laws being violated either by the university or on the campus grounds. That's where you do have to get law enforcement and government officials and all those kinds of things involved. But in general, otherwise, no. Get off my campus. Let me do my science. Yeah, let me do my science. That's all I want. So where am I? Well, well, well. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. And now that we're here in 2026, there's a bit of a recap going on of 2025. And here's some of the interesting things about this. Unless you were entirely under a rock, you obviously observed the interesting interactions of the Trump administration with higher education in the United States, and some of the rebuttals talking about how awful that is. Well, not rebuttals. Some of the commentary talking about how awful that is, and others in the commentary also reminding that some of this is in part academia's own fault. And so there are interesting comments going on, and in the last month or so, there's been commentary recapping 2025 and talking about reforms of academia and what have you in the United States, and talking about some of those interesting things that have been going on. And I think this piece that Lee Jussim published on his Substack, Unsafe Science, which I highly recommend, is an interesting read, coming from Lee. And if you don't know Lee, he is a professor of psychology at Princeton, actually, as well as I think he's one of the department chairs over there, if I remember correctly now. So he does know his stuff quite well, and has talked in length about some of the problems in psychology and sociology and other disciplines. So it's certainly interesting. He makes some good points in here, and a lot of the questions that have been asked, and also not asked, but indirectly folks saying, hey, we need to fix things, right? There's some folks like Greg Lukianov and others who've come at it from that perspective to say, look, we still have things we need to fix in academia. And, to some degree, there's been some interesting changes. I think I covered last year the compact on higher education that the Trump administration put forward, some of the pushback and lawsuits and things like that. There's a lot of those kinds of things going on, as well as the arguments around why some of this was academia's own faults when it didn't seem to care about some of its own internal problems and the like here. And so I'm formulating my thoughts a little bit off the top of my head as I think about this, but I'm going to use some of what Lee has written here to talk about internal reform of academia. I've also got a few other things to just get in that sort of mind and headspace. And if you have thoughts, let's hear it in the comments of this particular video. Of main question here being whether or not reform from the inside with academia is possible. If you followed along on this channel, I have mixed thoughts about that question generally as to whether or not it's possible, and then the tangential question being, what role then does the government play in the questions with academia if it cannot reform itself, or what role should it play in those kinds of things? I have very mixed thoughts on that. I know the spectrum goes from we can't trust academia to do anything of its own, can't do any of its own reform, that kind of thing, to academia can handle it, and the Trump administration, or any administration in power really, should just stay away and let us reform things. My guess in the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle, ultimately. But let's start with unsafe science. Is internal reform of academia possible? Rebuttals of the can't-do attitudes among some reformers. And that immediately tells you that Lee and his co-author here are a little bit more on the standpoint that universities can reform themselves a little bit and improve, address some of their internal problems. Lee here to start this co-written post. My as yet unindicted co-conspirator is Kevin McCaffrey. Hope I pronounced that right. He is a professor of sociology, co-editor-in-chief of Theory and Society, Springer Nature, co-editor of Evolutionary Analysis in the Social Sciences, Routledge, and co-director of the Skeptic Research Center. His interest in publishing spans fields and subdisciplines, and his hope is to play an even small role in saving academics from themselves. On the latter point, this will become obvious in the post. So Kevin and Lee then write. The problem within academia that has gotten us in so much trouble: left-wing ideological corruption of theory, methods, hiring, teaching, grant-making, and publishing. Solving this problem is going to be very difficult. Now, there is a fair amount of data and things to that effect, and Lee, of course, has a citation right here that you can see some of it coming from his own Substack, where he focuses, of course, on psychology and social science, but there are others too, and some of which I've talked about, some of which others have talked about, so yes, there is data to that point. Solving this problem is going to be very difficult. Typically, the contributing factors to this problem are assumed to exist among those people, in quotes, that is, in the ideologically motivated professors and incompetent administrators that facilitate cancel culture, censorship, intellectually suffocating conformity pressures, politicized journals, politicized professional societies, politicized funding, activism-infused scholarship, political discrimination, biased scholarship, narcissistic scholarship, and on and on and on. Again, Lee is pretty good about having citations in here too, so just and things along that line. Although much of the blame for our current circumstance can be fairly laid at the feet of these people, this post is not about them. It is instead about turning the mirror back on ourselves, on the real, and posturing more on this forthwith reformers who claim they would like to improve the situation. At some point, those frustrated with the state of social science and higher education should consider their potential role in the ongoing problems. This is true. We all got to look at what we're doing in the contribution here and how we'd want to improve things. It's all too easy to point the finger, and again, much of the finger pointing is sensible. But the state of affairs probably wouldn't be as bad if the ostensible reformers had been doing their job. Ouch. Would it, though? I guess it depends a little bit on who's got the loudest voice in terms of the academia and what have you, but I'll let that go for now. Thus, this post is about self-inflicted obstacles to reform. It is about the denialism that there even is a deep problem. It is about the attempts to deflect attention from addressing these problems. It is about the hand-wringing, pearl-clutching timidity among those who, with one hand, claim to want reform, and with the other are constantly explaining why it can't be done, or why now is not the right time to do it, or why the real concerning problem is something else entirely. One of the best examples can be found ready, wait for it, you won't believe it, at their Heterodox Academy 2025 conference. I do remember seeing this, actually. I might have actually talked about it at the time. Scroll through the video till 9:10 mark and listen to Mark Roth, president of Wesleyan University, talk about till about 12:30, 3.5 minutes, or, well, 3 minutes and 20 seconds, really. But here we go.
Our universities without burning them down. So what specific countermeasures is Wesleyan taking, and what do you recommend for other campuses?
Well, at Wesleyan, the specific countermeasures have been to create a change in the culture around intellectual diversity and heightened awareness about the political biases that undermine faculty hiring, that undermine classroom discussions, that undermine the education we want to offer. I think I first got involved with Heterodox Academy at the beginning of its existence because I believe, as those folks back then did, that the lack of intellectual diversity on our campuses undermines the work we do and the missions we have.
Good sentiment, I agree.
And so that means hiring a more diverse faculty, engaging the faculty we have in discussions about bias, And more recently, having the students themselves at Wesleyan, which is, I have to say, surprised me, complain about ideological rigidity among faculty and themselves call for a need for more political and intellectual diversity. But that said, I think right now that would be like talking about needing a better milkshake when the house is on fire. That would be like saying the problem in Ukraine is right now that there's corruption in the mining industry. That we are like, that the anthropology department at the University of Kiev.
Well, that's moderately annoying given the conversation. I can see what Leah's driving at already.
Tends to talk about settler colonialism too much. It's nonsense. We are at a time in our history when the federal government is trying to destroy civil society by undermining the legitimacy of colleges and universities, of law firms. Entertainment is on deck, and journalism. And so while we twiddle our thumbs and talk about reforming the university, people who want to destroy the university are doing so not because we don't have enough Republicans at the Tuck Business School or in Wesleyan's Department of Mathematics. They want to destroy the university because that's how you claim more executive power. And your complaints at the heterodox conferences for almost 10 years now about being too woke, about not having enough jobs for white people, about too many women in the academy have found resonance with an authoritarian push to control our spaces. And we can make nice and not say that, and we won't get investigated, or we can do our job, which is to call the indecent attack on our sector indecent, wrong-headed, lawless, authoritarian, fascistic, choose your words. But if you sit there and worry about the sociology department and whether Near East Studies is really anti-Semitic, I think you're doing the work of authoritarianism, and that's where we are right now.
Okay, I can see why Lee was annoyed with this commentary, because counterpoint that I would think someone would have to that is, well, why did people vote for that to begin with? Why did people push for the Trump administration, which frankly I am no fan of? They've aggravated the heck out of me with a bunch of the things that they've done, but I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to ask the question, why would people vote for that here? And why would people vote for a wrecking ball, if you will? So let's see. If you have to just keep reading, he's not alone, far from it. According to the Atlantic, Princeton president Eisgruber argued that American higher education was in better shape than ever before. He rejected the right-wing narrative that universities indoctrinate students in leftist ideology, as well as the notion that they should attempt to achieve an ideological balance that matches the country. Now, Musa Al-Gharbi, amongst others, has pointed out the ideological breakdown, for lack of a better way to describe it, of academia does not match the general public in the United States. Now, that's not a problem by itself if it doesn't lead to such things as have been discussed elsewhere, whether it be from the FIRE surveys or the heterodox surveys or what have you. So again, I asked the question, and it's funny because Mark Roth did acknowledge the problems and concerns that have been highlighted by others, but he's like, nope. Should always be, should always go back to the fact that X administration just wants to destroy things. And yeah, that might in part be true, at least. But again, why would somebody vote for that? Why would the majority of Americans vote for that is the bigger question you need to ask, because universities don't exist in a vacuum where the only thing that, where there's very little that that it influences. No. There's a significant amount of things that the universities and academia and what have you, sciences in particular, have an influence on in society. And so, yeah, general public does have quite an interest in that, and they vote, of course. So ask that question. Let's see. Eisgruber can reject anything he likes, but the evidence for indoctrination grows every year. His latter point is a straw argument that no one is making and exemplifies the sort of deflection that is the focus of this essay. If you can get people thinking, yeah, achieving ideological balance in academia is ridiculous, except for buffoons, Trump, and right-wingers, no one in their right mind thinks that's a great idea, then you can get them to stop paying attention. Well, I'm going to push back on that, at least with respect to Roth's idea, because that's not quite what he was saying. He's basically saying the other people are the bigger problem right now. Why are you focused on this? So I'm not going to put words in Roth's mouth, at least, although Eisgruber may think differently. So you can see there's an awful lot of perspectives here, and that's one of the things I want to get at with this channel. Some of the different perspectives with regards to what should and shouldn't be done with academia. And why do I, again, talk about academia? I've said it many times before. It's where we train the next generation of scientists, and the universities, their primary function is the pursuit of the truth and the communication of that knowledge and teaching other students how to do that in the future. Let's see. Then you can get them to stop paying attention to the actual arguments and proposals of the internal to academia reformers, none of which involve achieving some sort of utopian ideological balance in academia. This is also the thing. It's not necessarily about achieving the utopian ideological balance, but fostering a culture where you can have those discussions without fear. And if you relentlessly deflect, deny, and avoid the arguments and proposals of those internal to academia, the only route left open to reform is from outside forces, such as the federal and state governments. And this is the tension about the internal to academia kind of aspect. And there, it is an argument to be said that maybe there are bigger problems than the internal issues right now, and we shouldn't be worried about that. Well, might come back to that as well. Well, when are we going to? At this point, like thinking about these things is not a bad thing in the slightest, and it needs to be thought about and talked about. Let's see. We participate in a variety of organizations and efforts to reform academia. We hear variations of these defensive deflections all the time. If some academics wish to fight Trump and his policies, that's the American way. Go for it. I'm fine with that. Go do it. But Trump's real or imagined failures are completely irrelevant to addressing the very real and now massive multi-pronged problem of left-wing political corruption within academia. No one in their right minds would declare, well, cancer is really terrible, so now's the time to address heart disease. And yet Roth, again paraphrased in The Atlantic, quote, Roth told me that universities have room to improve on some fronts, including increasing viewpoint diversity among the faculty. But he believes that they can address that on their own time once Trump is out of office. To be worried about that right now seems to me like people in Ukraine worrying about corruption in the mining industry. Roth told me it's the Russians that are the problem. Roth has been the president of Wesleyan since 2007. Because it is very important to understand how much credibility he has earned when he says he will address the problems after Trump is gone. His vast I remember Lee's stuff well enough to know that he can be quite sarcastic, because this is a his vast track record of reforms in addressing the political corruption of academia pre-Trump is shown in the figure below. Oh. Hey, Lee, Lee, if you end up watching this, that's a typo. So, there's a lot of interesting comments here, courtesy of Lee with respect to these. And what he's basically pointing out in here is that there is a lot of denials, deflections, people thinking, no, it's not really a need to do this at all. But I go back to I forget which report it is. I go back to some of the concerning things I've seen where some students are now not considering grad school or very hesitant to go to grad school because of the perceived hostile environment to them for what they think. Perceived or real, in some cases, hostile environment to what they think. So it's not nothing to be thinking about, and it does need to be addressed. The denials and things of really dealing with issues and what have you, it's just, there's a lot in here to go read. But the question, of course, is, he's addressing all the different arguments for not doing any internal reforms at all. And all of these links here are actually related to that in here. But I do want to get to some of the other aspects with this, because it is true too that there's been a denial of certain things. I think, like right here, for example, yeah, here it is. Lee points out this piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which I saw that and I started laughing too, because I know an awful lot of people who would not consider themselves Trump supporters who are all for increasing viewpoint diversity. So that was a total mess in the Chronicle of Higher Education, that piece. But but I do also see more people interested and thinking about it, which is cause for cautious optimism and hope with it. And that actually brings me to the next piece. This comes from the Harvard Crimson, just right at the start of the year. This is the new president, Alan Garber of Harvard University, which Johnny come lately to the party here, but he acknowledges part of the problem. Actually, Garber faults faculty activism for chilling campus debate and free speech. Now, you have to remember that according to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression and their college free speech ranking survey, consistently Harvard has been either at the bottom or damn near close to the bottom as one of the worst universities in the country for campus viewpoint diversity and free expression, and chilling students' speech as well as staff and faculty. So, for him to be acknowledging it is not necessarily a bad thing. But let's read on a little bit. From the Harvard Crimson. Harvard president Alan M. Garber, 76, I guess he graduated in 1976, said the university went wrong by allowing professors to inject their personal views into the classroom, arguing that faculty activism had chilled free speech and debate on campus. In a rare and unusually candid remarks on a podcast released on Tuesday, which, oh gosh, that would have been right before the new year, released on Tuesday, Garber appeared to tie many of higher education's oft-cited ills, namely a dearth of tolerance and free debate, to a culture that permits and at times encourages professors to foreground their identity and perspectives in teaching. Quote, how many students would actually be willing to go toe-to-toe against a professor who's expressed a firm view about a controversial issue? And to this point, it's not unheard of for students to just be a little afraid to challenge a professor because a professor is an authority figure. And so when you have a professor that's pushing certain views and different things and what have you, it does make it challenging for a student to want to do that unless you're a very confident student going in which, good on you, we should foster that more. Foster that ability and confidence in students to think and debate and put forward their ideas. Having those open conversations are a good thing on a college campus in particular. The remarks mark Garber's most explicit public acknowledgement that faculty practices have contributed to a breakdown in open discourse on campus, and that he is committed to backtracking toward neutrality in the classroom. Garber's tenure in Massachusetts Hall has been defined by sustained controversy over free speech on campus. He inherited a campus deeply divided over the October 7th, 2023 attack on Israel, and faced heavy external criticism for its handling of campus responses in its wake. Harvard's handling of campus responses in its wake, because this is Harvard's and this is the October 7th attack in Israel. So grammatical issues here of the Harvard Crimson. In response, Garber has launched a flurry of initiatives aimed at restoring what he has described as a culture of debate. Shortly after he assumed presidency, Harvard adopted an institutional voice policy that commits the university and its top administrators to refrain from taking official positions on policy issues. That I think is pretty close to the institutional neutrality argument. Now, that's about the institution itself, not necessarily about people in their personal capacity. Though Garber has carved some exceptions to the policy, notably when he, in his personal capacity, condemned a post marking the anniversary, has increasingly emphasized restraint, particularly in the classroom. I'm pleased to say, quote, I'm pleased to say that I think there is real movement to restore balance in teaching and to bring back the idea that you really need to be objective in the classroom, he said. Garber's remarks came during a December 16th, 2025 live taping of the Identity Crisis podcast produced by the Shalom Hartman Institute and focused on issues in modern Jewish life. The talk, a conversation with Hartman Institute President Yehuda Kurtzer, took place just one day after Garber's term as president was extended indefinitely, though the episode did not air until Tuesday. While the podcast touched on free speech, anti-Semitism, and protest policy, Kurtzer, who earned his PhD at Harvard, did not press Garber on Harvard's ongoing conflict with the federal government or a potential settlement. In his, if you haven't heard, Harvard and the federal government, the Trump administration, have been butting heads like nothing else. It has certainly been interesting to watch, going back and forth with it. I haven't been commenting on it because there's too much going on right now with that. In his responses, Garber echoed the sentiment of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences report released last January, which affirmed professors' right to extramural speech, but warned that instructors must proactively encourage disagreement in the classroom to avoid alienating students. One example of professors espousing political views, Garber said, was the rise of anti-Israel sentiment among a body. Okay. I don't need to go through this too much, but this is just to make the reason I wanted to read that far was just to make my point that you're having university presidents thinking about it who maybe hadn't been thinking about it before. What are some of the internal problems in academia that need to be addressed? And that's good. That is the kinds of things that need to be addressed, most definitely. And I'm hopeful that it will be somewhere in the future. I do think internal reform is possible, and I am very much of the mind of a hands-off approach when it comes to federal and state governments, with exceptions being granted there for violations of law. Deliberate violations, for example, of the Civil Rights Act, amongst others. That does necessitate government involvement. But in general, no. I don't want any administration anywhere near a university. I think it's a bad thing. In general, here, as I said, again, specific cases of law being something different, matters of law being something different, with laws being violated either by the university or on the campus grounds, that's where you do have to get law enforcement and government officials and all those kinds of things involved. But in general, otherwise, no. Get off my campus. Let me do my science, yeah? Let me do my science. That's all I want. So where am I thinking this is going to go? I do think it's possible to have some internal reform. I also do think that it's good for those folks internally who want to see reforms and push for reforms, have some support from folks like Heterodox Academy, the Academic Freedom Alliance, amongst others, so they can get some of those reforms started, if not pushed through, and get the support of the leadership in universities who are hopefully not scared of a whole lot of things. But that's not going to be an easy thing to do. And like certain things, the Chronicle of Higher Education, I've seen some similar stuff in Nature and Science and what have you, ignoring the very real problems that do exist in academia is not going to help matters. And again, I go back to the question, let's think about why somebody would vote the way they would when they're thinking about academia, if they're thinking about it as one of the major issues. Admittedly, it's probably not a major issue for most Americans when they're thinking about voting, but doesn't mean it's nothing either. So why go that way? So I think you could push it both ways. You could definitely push back on federal government pressure, state government pressure from any of the number of administrations, and at the same time, make sure you're pushing for good reforms in academia to address some of the very real problems that are internal to academia, not just the ones that come from outside pressures. Both need to be addressed, and I do think both can be addressed. But can you do it just when somebody's gone? I question whether or not the impetus will be there if there's not some kind of external thing going on to cause people to think about some of the internal issues at the same time. If you get what I'm saying here. But I don't know. I think internal reform is still possible. It just might be a question of how do you go about doing it. And do you perhaps have support for those internal reformers from outside actors who are preferably themselves not the federal government? I think that might be the way to go, but I'm not 100% sure. But there are internal things with universities that need to be reformed, for sure. And I think there might also need to be complementing to that safeguards that could come as a matter of law to protect universities in their capacity as institutions in pursuit of knowledge and pursuit of the truth and training the next generation of students. So let me know what you think. What do you think about the idea of internal reforms in academia versus some of the external pressures? Always keep it civil in the comments, please. And with that, hit the like button on the way out the door if you like the video. Share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Welcome again to 2026. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.